Welcome to the Executive Formula, the podcast where we discuss executive careers and executive recruitment. Hello everyone, I'm your host, Edouard Thoumyre, Managing Partner at ACCUR Recruiting Services, a boutique executive search firm specialized in consumer goods industries. Today is our second episode with a guest we've known for a long time, Rob Maneson. Rob is a senior executive in the tobacco industry. He first spent about 15 years with two large public companies, Altria and then Imperial Tobacco, now called Imperial Brands. At Imperial, Rob started in trade marketing, then led the retail strategy and marketing for Cigars, a recently acquired company by the group. He became general manager of a newly created retail division called Casa de Montecristo, went back to Cigars as the managing director, and finally became senior VP of sales for another division called Fontem, dedicated to tobacco alternatives. After Imperial, Rob was head of sales for Lucy Goods, a privately owned tobacco alternative company, head of sales for Air Global, a private equity-backed company, the world-leading shisha tobacco brand, and now general manager for a newly formed startup in the cigar industry, unapologetically called the League of Fat Bastard Cigars. Rob, welcome to the Executive Formula. It's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
All right, thank you. So first, quick disclaimer. For the listeners who are not necessarily very interested in the tobacco industry, I want to reassure them that even though we will discuss it a little bit, it's not the main focus of today's episode. We'll just try to discuss it like we would any other category, as an example. And this is also the approach we have at ACCUR Recruiting Services, where tobacco is one of the few consumer categories that we serve. And similar to the first episode we had with Nadine Heubel a few days ago, I would like today to discuss how you grew your career, as an example, how you became an executive like you are today. And I'm also interested in exploring the differences between working for a publicly owned company versus a privately owned company versus a private equity-backed companies. Even though sometimes titles and job description look the same, the mindset and the approach is usually quite different. And this is a topic that comes up very often in our searches, either with the employers or with the candidates. So I know you've been exposed to each of these different types of companies and ownerships, and so I thought it would be an interesting subject. I've been speaking
absolutely.
way too much, so the floor is yours. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you so much. I mean, yeah, I think you nicely showed and talked about my career. My
No
career is
mistake
really
on my
interesting,
part?
right? No, I think it was quite on. So, I've had an opportunity to work in a number of different public and private companies, and I've been fortunate enough to grow my career since really coming out of university. So starting in a very low level and learning those experiences and gaining skills in a variety of different roles, and each role progressively getting more responsibility, bigger scope, and really ultimately to running businesses, which has been super fun and enjoyable and a real reward for myself and my career. So you mentioned tobacco. I mean, ultimately, I started my career in what I would call a fast-moving consumer goods company.
Sure.
The tobacco sector is very similar to other fast-moving consumer goods. We just happen to sell a tobacco product. But the principles and the steps and how you go to market is very similar from our products to transpiring to other fast-moving goods. So the learning is, I think, is quite consistent versus other goods.
And applicable across industries as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but you mentioned it. I started my career with Altria. Altria at the time was a company that owns craft foods, had international businesses.
Oh, I didn't remember that.
Large, multinational company with, I think was at the time maybe 100,000 employees worldwide. So it was a huge organization. And for me, that was the opportunity. The reason, yes, I joined the cigarette side of the business and the tobacco side of the business, but one of the reasons I joined out of university was the opportunity to go such large scale. And at the time they owned still a large portion of Miller Brewing as well. So you had craft foods, Miller Brewing, and the tobacco side of the business. And so it was really a huge opportunity. And one of the things that attracted me to the opportunity was the training programs they offered was really quite good. So it was very thorough and in depth. And I thought it would be a good start to any career that I had, is gaining this incredible training. And in hindsight, it's been wonderful. Some of the best training I got in my professional career was the first several years kind of working for them in various capabilities. And so, that's always great. I think private companies are quite different from that perspective.
Sure. So 2 points before we continue, mentioning the training. I've noticed, I didn't necessarily know that before starting working with tobacco companies, but I noticed when we started working for Imperial Tobacco as well as for JTI a long time ago, that these companies seem to be really good employers. And the way I was looking at it is that maybe because they're not necessarily attractive for everybody, they have
That's exactly right.
limited reach to candidates. Therefore, they have to be probably better employers in the way they treat employees than others. And so I've noticed people, staying for a long, long time in those companies, but not only staying, but also moving up the ranks. And apparently, development programs and training programs have been a common thing, especially among the top tobacco companies. So Imperial, BAT, Philip Morris, etc.
I think you nailed it, Edward. So, I mean, traditionally, tobacco companies are maybe not as highly sought after as, different categories in fast-moving consumer goods. So, for them to attract the right talent, they have to be traditionally their benefits packages are very healthy and strong. Their training and development is at the forefront, and the career progression options and path is very clear, generally speaking. And so, that applied to me and appealed to me when I was looking for it. I wasn't and still really aren't a tobacco user. So it wasn't an issue for me from a moral issue, but it was, do I really want to work here? And is the mission right? But also as a young employee and I somebody just coming out of college, those things were important, is the ability to kind of career advancement, the skill set development, so that whatever I moved into in the future, I'd have a good basis. And to your point, yes, all of the tobacco companies that I'm familiar with, traditionally the larger multinationals, very focused on career development, very focused on training and development. And so they're great bases and kind of places to be from that regard. My experience, it would tell you, and again, limited experience, but my experience is that traditionally public companies offer much more of that than the private companies.
Of course.
My experience is the private companies are really kind of hiring people who have the skill set they want and trying to do a very specific task or very specific things. And again, that might be over a year or multiple years, but very specific focused. And so less focused on the development of their employees. Maybe the benefits are strong, but the development career advancement is not as clearly aligned. And so from my experience,
to the size as well.
Benefit.
Maybe it's to the size.
I think so. Yeah. So I've been part of some larger private equity firm companies and very small, like I am now, or startups. Startups obviously have zero training and development.
Their
focus is on survival and growing the business exponentially. And so it's a very different mindset. And so my experience, I think, is quite unique, is a combination of both public and private. Is fun. And it's also, for me, it's been able to take the learnings from both and use different things that I experience and apply them to the work I do, which has been also fun for me. It's just unique environments that I've had a chance to operate in.
It's funny because it's a discussion sometimes I have with so sometimes I get asked to coach families and friends who are starting their career, and I do that not too often, but I've done it many times. And one of the things that I have learned from all those years in executive search is that it's a really good bet to look for an employer that is a renowned employer to develop careers, rather than focus on the category you personally love. And typically, if you start working in your career with Coca-Cola, P&G, L'Oreal, and to a certain extent as well the large tobacco companies, but also you mentioned Kraft, Mondelez now. These are fantastic employers to grow the beginning stages of your career, 10, 15 years. because you do have access to a lot of training and development programs, and then you become highly bankable for any other companies, private equity backed companies, etc. And so this is a cycle that I see very often. And people who, on the contrary, start their career with a focus on products they like only, but not necessarily looking at the quality of the employer from a career perspective, they don't necessarily, they don't have the same guarantees or the same likelihood of growing a career. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you've got that right. I think again depends on the individual and what they want in their career, but ultimately for me it was my ambition was to um, grow and kind of get more and more responsibility. And so I never set out, even as a young employee, I never thought, oh man, I'm going to be a general manager or managing director of a business. That was never my kind of aspiration. But as you kind of move along in your career and you get more and more exposure and more development, those
Mm-hmm.
things then became absolute goals for me,
Possible.
right? So
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, so it's the possibility of that, and what would that mean for me professionally in my career, and would I enjoy doing those things? And so that became very unique, and I love it now. Again, the ability, what drives me is the ability to make change in an organization, be it financial for the business or personnel and developing people, or something bigger. And I think when I started my career, again, as a low level field sales territory person, my focus was individually on my 150 accounts in a very small market. And at some point, as I was working hard and developing, it was like, well, how does my contribution matter to the big company? And
Yeah.
so from that regard, it was frustrating. And so, because it was like, well, my little piece is very irrelevant to a massive company. And then as you grow your career, that small piece becomes actually much bigger. And
Yeah.
what I found is, for me personally, my reward is seeing action I put in place or a strategy I put in place have an actual real impact to the business, be it good or bad, right? And we all make mistakes, so you learn from those mistakes where they don't have a positive impact, and you try to make better decisions next time. But the ability to make a real decision for the company that has an impact, um, is what gets me the most excited about my work, right? And that's, I think, at a startup or a publicly traded company is, how do you enhance that? At a startup, it's very different, right? So the startups I worked at are focused on radical growth. It's the hockey stick,
Of
right?
course.
So it's a massive curve of growth. How do you do that? How do you create a business that generates the flywheel quickly and continuously? Where publicly traded companies, again, in the sectors that I've been in, have traditionally been focused on um, very slow and steady growth, right?
But usually they have a
And
leading
there's a
position already, so they have to
That's
maintain a
right.
leading position or improve it a little bit. But yeah.
Yeah, that's right. But it's also different, right? I think the expectations of the shareholders are very different. Even if it's a public company, the expectations are continuous capital investment,
Yeah.
moderate growth, strong results of the stock price or shareholder value. In private equity companies, they're hoping for a home run, right? They're hoping
Yeah.
for a big splash in growth and
And then exit.
20x
Yeah.
return on investment of their money. So they're willing to take a lot more chances
Yeah.
than the
True.
public company. And again, it's the pros and cons of both. But at both points in my career, I've really kind of experienced both, and they're both incredibly rewarding. Maintaining your value position of a publicly traded company when you're 50% market share is a really unique, hard challenge. Same as growing a business from 1% market to 10%. That's also a very unique challenge, and I've had the ability and the luck to do work for both kinds of companies. So
Sure.
a lot of fun.
But it comes back also to a discussion I've had many times with people trying to find how to start their career. Where very often I would tell them um, that if they start with a good employer, and usually a large employer, very well known, they open up more doors for the future as well. They get trained and they get called for other types of opportunities. It's not necessarily as easy when you start with a small privately owned company that doesn't necessarily have a big name. And if you do a few years there, you don't necessarily have the big label of, 10, 15 years with a large publicly traded Imperial Tobacco, craft food, whatever. And so you can more easily start with large employers and go into smaller employers to have a big impact and be a GM there. And then the opposite. The opposite is almost impossible.
Yeah, I think it's my experience is the same, but I also know from friends and family that similar career paths or very, kind of levels of careers through networking. I think if you start with a smaller company, you're taking a much bigger gamble that they
Yeah,
have some unique
it can
product
still
that is
work,
gonna,
but yeah,
it can work, but I think it's one in a thousand, and I'm, this is my guess, 1 in 1,000 versus one in 10, right? So
sure.
it's much harder that they're going to start from the ground and grow. And obviously, there's some incredible companies that have grown to become huge, and you can then transition back to publicly traded companies
True.
as that company grows because you have the experience of scaling and something. But I think your point is valid, which is, the learnings I got from working at a big company, the training I got, and able to apply those to smaller companies who are growing has been a lot easier than the other way. I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
think in my career I would have been able to start at some of the privately held kind of small companies and take that same learning to a bigger company. It wouldn't have worked in my career.
Hmm.
And again, it for me, my growth personally and professionally was, keep going up the ladder. There are people now who start careers who don't want that. They're happy and content with,
Sure.
a good salary and good benefits and a product that they care about and can be passionate about. That's awesome. I have no, all the respect for those people. It's just what you want in your career. But I think if your goal is to, become a managing director someday or, a VP of whatever company, I think the experience and the training is going to be critical to you doing that. And you can get that through your company. You can obviously get that through an MBA or,
Yeah.
other kind of, doctoral programs or, learnings outside of that. But I think your company is important. I also think your CV makes, you know, when you're growing your career and moving around different people look at certainly what company you worked for, what brands
Of
they
course.
represent, and
It's a
what you
big
did.
label.
So
Hmm.
it's very much so. I think that is an important piece as somebody transitions and keep going up
Hmm.
their careers. Well, you worked for XYZ company and they had these incredible brands that people recognize and had huge brand awareness. Oh, it makes the connection for them a lot easier than,
Of
oh, I
course.
work for this small brand that company maybe I've never heard of, and it's more niche focused or specific to
Hmm.
a category. So, I think all of those things matter at some point. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality of kind of hiring, I think.
It is a reality. I mean, statistically, at least it's a reality. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to bounce back on the fact you were saying that becoming a general manager was not necessarily a goal of yours when you started your career, but it became a goal as you probably got a little closer. And I was surprised because I always kind of thought like most people, when they become a GM, it's because they've been looking to become a GM or managing director. You feel it was not the case for you, or
Well,
it
no, I
became
think
gradual?
early in my, yeah, I think it became gradual. I think very much when I started my career at 23 years old in a big company, my ambition was never to become the managing director CEO. My ambition was to grow my career and get great experiences. And I could
Yeah.
see myself in kind of at the time it was very hierarchical, but there was several levels I could see. Oh, that's a job I want to be at, which would have been at the time several steps above where I was at from the ground floor. As you progress, I think for me, I was continuing to look upward to see what roles. And then when I joined Imperial, you guys placed me, and that was the first time we worked together. I joined Imperial as a trade marketing person, and my scope and responsibility was interest. It was the first time in a career at a bigger company, not necessarily a small company, bigger company, I had interaction with the CEO and the managing directors on a
Yeah.
regular basis. And so, then I saw my work and I said, oh, okay, I'm actually, I'm making an impact to the business, not just a division of the business or a small piece of the business. I'm making an impact. And, they're seeking my voice
Yeah.
in how to define problems or how to solve problems or how to grow the business. And that was super rewarding for me personally. And then you start thinking, okay, what does my career progression look like? And I would say, I was very fortunate. And again, my work was good that got me in the right positions that it quickly became apparent that, yeah, I could have a chance to be run a business unit. And then, once I became a business unit, kind of running as the number 2 position, being the number 1 became really attainable, right? I was okay.
Mm-hmm.
Not that you're trying to push somebody out, but this is my career progression. I'm being, my manager's talking to me about succession planning, and I'm going to be slotted for these types of roles. So it became really rewarding. And then, I started in Imperial. I started running a very small division as a startup, right? So that was a new division they created, and the challenge of getting that, in a big organization off the ground, and what business, building the business case and getting the people to sign off, even higher up the business, and, starting that was exciting and rewarding. And I did that well, and was rewarded with a much bigger opportunity to become a managing director. And then I will tell you that when I was the CEO of JR, it was probably one of the most rewarding positions. It was a large business. We were expected to grow, and it was in a category I enjoyed quite a bit. So the work, the result, and the people, most importantly, the people was incredible. And so that was really exciting. And then my work there led me to an even bigger role and for Imperial. And so, it's been great. And again, once you kind of see the mountaintop, if you will, it's exciting. I think it's not for everybody. And there's positions I've said I want to step back from leading and rather be, lead the sales organization versus all the organization. And in my new role, it's as a general manager of a brand new business. So I'm running everything. And that's also very exciting for me, is making decisions, setting the strategy, and then trying to put the infrastructure in place so that we can scale to a much higher degree.
What's interesting as well is that during your time at Imperial, it seems like you were exposed to, I would say, the legacy business of this large company, but also to internal startup businesses and business units, which gave you an opportunity to tackle much more entrepreneurial type of missions. And it's interesting because often what we see with people with 15, 20 years of large companies with very established brands is that sometimes if they want to leave this large company and go work for a smaller company, etc., they don't necessarily have the exposure to an entrepreneurial environment, and it becomes a concern for the new employer. And often what we discuss with employers is that we like the idea of having executives who have been trained with the large businesses because they get all the best practices, but then who have been exposed to an entrepreneurial venture, and then they become the best candidates for typically, for example, a private equity-backed company that seeks very fast growth with high returns, etc., which are also the positions where you can make the most money as an executive. And so it's the good combination, like the publicly traded, established, then entrepreneurial, and then you go into a fast-growing, high-reward equity type of position.
Yeah, I mean, I was very fortunate at Imperial. Twice in my career there, they had in very two different categories within the tobacco space. I was able to do that in two different roles. So my first, as you mentioned, was Casa de Montecristo at the time. The U.S., and this is during the Obama administration, his last years, he was starting to normalize relations with the Cuban government.
Cuba, I remember.
Imperial owned 50% of the Cuban cigar business. So they saw that as an opportunity to quickly build out a business unit in the US that allowed us to expand should that governmental relationship change for the positive long term. And so all of a sudden it was move into hyperdrive of create this business unit so that we can leverage it when the market opens. Which still hasn't actually happened, but they were ambitious to do that at the time. And then second time in my career with them was, the vape business across the U.S.
So this was with Phantom, right?
Phantom. Yeah. So Phantom was Blue e-cigarettes was the growth stage of the company, and they were putting a significant bet globally around the space. And so I was positioned, and simply because candidly, I'd met the right people at Imperial, and they'd seen what I did, and they came to me and said, "We'd love to move into this role." And it was an awesome opportunity because the entire investment of the company was really around this arm of the business. And so, aspirations to go from $100 million business to $1 billion business overnight. So quite a lot.
Did it reach $1 billion?
No, not quite.
No, but at least you have a goal. Yeah.
It's closer to it now. Yeah. So it's closer to it now, but no resource was kind of off limits at the time. So that was a real eye opener for me, is like trying to get an ROI and trying to bring in different things, and massively growing was fantastic for my career. And then again, private equity, I've worked primarily ACCUR since then in the last few years. And it's great because they have the same growth mentality at a different way to do it. And so you're 100% right. I don't think I'd be in the companies I've worked for since. I don't think I would have even been a candidate had I not had those experiences previously within a big company. And so it's been quite enjoyable. And again, obviously, my fortunate, not everybody has that opportunity, even in Imperial or other big companies. So, but it worked for me, and it's been great.
Sure, and it goes back to, I mean, many of the roles, if we set aside CEO, managing directors, you've been a head of sales for many years throughout your career in these different types of environments, and we often get this discussion as well with employers about their head of sales or their salespeople. Are they chasing new business or maintaining existing business? And of course, if you're of an established brand, most of your work is, maintaining established business versus hunting for new business with a startup company in fast growth mode. And those are two different, very different sides of the same head of sales type of position. And it's not always easy to transition from one to the other.
Yeah, I think, it's very different. And to your point, even in the same categories is quite different, the role, right? So, I mean, when you're at a big FMCG with a massive market share, 30, 40, 50%, you can generally call up those customers and get an immediate meeting and discussion, not just with the buyer, but it's the senior people.
Higher level as well.
The C-suite. So, because they know your company, and they know what contribution you are to their business. When you're a startup trying to break in, the message is very different, right? You're trying to sell on the concept of not only your product and the difference between your unique selling proposition versus others, but you're also trying to convince the buyers and their folks that they should support you because you're a better alternative, right?
Yeah.
Be it better can mean a lot of things, but better because you provide more profitability to the business if on a per unit basis, or you're a brand that's going to disrupt the category and take it over, all of these things. And it's I think quite unique in that regard as well. Obviously, it helps to have at least a relationship with some of the buyers from your previous.
Yeah.
But I think I would also tell you, some of them don't care, right? They don't care about Rob Maneson. They care about, oh, well, you just happen to represent that brand. And that's why, not to say they don't like me personally, but, my name is only going to get me so far. It might get me them to pick up the phone call, but I still have to be able to deliver a message and a reason. They're not just going to do it because it's a favor to me. They have to do it for their business. And so I think the selling is very different from that regard, is what you're selling is again, much more creative versus a big company that's let's just maintain market share and
it's more of a business case.
It's a business case of like, well, maybe we shouldn't spend this much money on you this year, or whatever it is. It's the return is much more different. So again, it's been an enjoyable experience with some of these companies of how do you, when you get the customer who says, man, I really believe the mission you have, and I want to disrupt the companies that, are the big ones, and you can help me do that. It's like, excitement in the room, and everybody's energy is high, because then you've got a partner who really want to help you grow. And to see that come into fruition is awesome.
I hope this is what you get now with the new cigar company you're with as well, like disrupting and getting some partnerships, really excited about helping you grow the business.
Yeah, this is the most exciting thing. So, I've been in the job 6 weeks now, and it's been a mix of trying to grow customers at the same time as creating the infrastructure and make sure we've
Yeah,
got the right plans for the
it's a
future.
lot.
And so it's really rewarding,
Hmm.
certainly a lot, but it's been fun so far.
Yeah. I was just curious as well about the tobacco industry. You were not necessarily married to it at the beginning, but it seems you've built your career around it. And for many people from the outside, the tobacco industry is not a growing company. I check a growing industry, sorry, and I checked the numbers. There's growth globally. I'm not sure if within the US there's growth as well, but there's probably also very different types of growth depending on the subcategories between cigarettes, cigars, vaping, and tobacco alternatives, etc. What made you keep on growing your career within this industry? Is it just passion because you like these products, or is it just it's an easy transition and you get called, and therefore it's an easy career progression? How? What's behind it?
Yeah, it's a mix of both. I'd say in my early career, I didn't necessarily want to become stayed in tobacco. I was looking to go at Altria, grow a few different levels and move
Hmm.
to another category. I think we hit on this a little bit earlier. Number one, the benefits of tobacco companies are generally very good.
Yeah,
So from a motivation standpoint, not to say that, if you go into beverages or other consumer products goods, they don't pay well, but the pay is an element of it. And I think as I've become more longer in my career, people, I get calls from tobacco companies
of
in
course.
various sectors saying, you've got this skill set, the industry. So I think that applies. I've been reached many times by other folks who, either the company doesn't work for me at the time or it's not a
Hmm.
category I necessarily want to get into. But so I think it's interesting. You talk about the growth. I think the growth, tobacco is overarching. You mentioned kind of several subcategories. The subcategories have lots of growth depending on what they
Yeah.
are. Some are declining, some are massively growing. So and again, it from a big company to a very small company, the growth is very different
Yeah,
as well, right?
you can
Somebody,
pick up a trend that is crazy as opposed to staying on a very stable or declining one. Yeah,
that's right. So it's quite amendable for me personally in that regard. I mean, I'm in a place that wants to grow. It's literally in a nascent business. They just really started in February of this year. So, we have very, very, it's building the entire business and growing. So everything is growth right now.
yeah,
And so, coming from another place where it was trying to maintain that growth.
yeah.
So again, different place, different time, but the opportunities, my goal is, I think, I don't think that's any different from the beverage category. If I look to the beer category in the
It's
US,
very
if you're
similar. Yeah,
Anheuser-Busch, it's very similar. If you're in
yeah,
AB
yeah.
InBev, you're trying to maintain market share, and there might be segments in the beer category that they go acquire because they're on growth trajectory versus, Butter Bud Light or Miller Lite or whatever that is. So it's very similar. I think you look at the snacks category in the US, again, I'm just thinking about consumer
Hmm.
um, those I think premium luxury goods are very different, right? So the
Yeah.
LVMHs of the world and some of that is very different. But yeah,
Hmm.
immediate consumables I think is my they have the same challenges that the tobacco space has.
Yeah. All right, great. I think we've reached the half hour mark and the end of our discussion today. But I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add in terms of like advice for people growing their career. I mean, we've touched many points already, but if you have any final thought about it.
Well, I think, yeah, thank you very much for inviting me, and this has been great fun. I would say my one last piece of advice is, whatever career you're in, and whatever your goal, I think there's, the more you read, the more you reach out to people and network, the opportunities grow. And meeting people like you guys have led some incredible opportunities to me, and getting to work with your firm has opened a lot of doors for me, and also people I've worked with. So
Mhm.
find those opportunities if you're a candidate, and explore those progressively, and you'll have those opportunities to grow your career, I think, for sure.
Yeah, we didn't discuss that today, but last time with Nadine Heubel, we discussed as well mentorship and trying to grow a team or individual mentors around you who can help you in different situations, and you can do that, on your own. And so I invite people to maybe take a look at the previous one. It was interesting in that regard as well. All right, excellent. Thank you very much for your time today, Rob, and sharing those advice. And it's been a pleasure to have you on the show.
Nice to see you again. Thank you again for the opportunity.
All right. Thank you, Rob. Bye.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Executive Formula by ACCUR Recruiting Services. We hope you found today's episode insightful and inspiring. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform to catch all the upcoming episodes. And if you have any questions or topic you would like us to cover, please reach out to us. We will see you in the next episode. Thank you.